Bonsoir. Thank you for joining me this evening for this lecture on queer black expats in Paris, from James Baldwin to today. I'd like to start by expressing my gratitude to the American Library in Paris for allowing me to give this lecture and for hosting me during their fellowship, which is made possible due to contributions from the De Groot Foundation. This fellowship has been remarkable for me for two reasons. One is I'm a parent. My husband and I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. My understanding is that parents of old and past generations, when they were writers, they were able to go into their office and say to their spouse and their children, "Don't bother me when I'm in here. Papa's working, it's important, and whatever you're doing can wait." That sort of worked. I think they got the time to themselves. I will note that a lot of older novelists have had a divorce or two and have estranged relationships with their grown children. I am trying to stay happily married and on speaking terms with my kids. So that doesn't work at my house. My kids come into my office all the time. They seem to think that their problems are as important as mine and that their concerns need my immediate attention. So it was great and lovely to have this fellowship, to have space. I told my husband today, if you'd asked me before the fellowship, I would have told you that I'm a slow reader. I think it turns out that I was an interrupted reader. That if I can get going for 30 or 40 minutes, I can really fly through half a book. And so I really appreciate that help. The second reason this has been remarkable for me is I am a horribly inefficient researcher. My book that's coming out is called There's Only One Sin in Hollywood, and I was absolutely certain, because it takes place during the 50s and 60s, that Anthony Perkins from Psycho was going to be in this book. I mean, he was a closeted gay man, he was an international star, he was of the era, he's going to be in the book. So I read 2 biographies on him. One of them was like 400 pages long on the life of Anthony Perkins. And as I read the book, he just didn't show up. And then he showed up in one chapter, and then in revisions, I cut that one chapter. So all that reading, and I thought, for nothing. But then, in that reading, I read about one of his boyfriends, Tab Hunter. And Tab Hunter ended up in the book. So I guess I learned about the life of Anthony Perkins so I could discover Tab Hunter and use him in the book. This is not how I recommend you do your research if you're working on something. Coming here, I got something I've never had before: help. There was a staff to help me with my research and to make calls and put me into contact with people I probably couldn't have gotten into contact with on my own, to get archival material from like the Yves Saint Laurent Museum, who, when I contacted them, they said, "We're absolutely closed and it would be impossible for us to help you during this period." The American Library called, and suddenly I had snapshots of the collection that I needed. So I'm very grateful to the staff for all their help and for this fellowship. To give you an idea of what you're in for tonight, this talk is going to reflect how my mind works as an author. I'm African American, I'm gay, I'm a storyteller and a research nerd. I'm particularly drawn to pieces of history that have sort of vanished, that have gone under. I'm also very driven to look at history in a way that only fiction can, in a way that strict historians will not. I write primarily about Black, queer people in history. Now, if I were writing nonfiction, I would need letters, love letters, I would need diaries, I would need documentation. Unfortunately, due to the oppression that these people lived under, they wouldn't have put these sort of private thoughts, or they wouldn't have revealed themselves in documentation. When who you are has been criminalized, you are not apt to make much of a record, because that would be evidence held against you. So I'm able, through fiction, to be able to sort of fill in a gap that the historians won't allow, and I love doing that. Something else I also enjoy is making connections between events that don't immediately catch the eye. I want my characters grounded in, yes, their immediate circumstances of culture and politics, but I'm also looking for the long arc of history that is like raining down on them, even if they don't know it. I write historical fiction, and I like to use true events and actual people to add context and give my fictional protagonists at the heart of the novel depth and sort of dimension in a way that they're not normally getting that treatment. I find it a cruel irony that, again, strict historians would say, well, we can't write these people into the history because they don't have their papers in order. And they don't have their papers in order because in their lives, people were trying to eliminate them from the present. And so this is my way of sort of reclaiming history for those of us who weren't in the first drafts. In my debut novel, My Government Means to Kill Me, I populated the story of a fictional young gay black man having his political and sexual awakening in 1980s New York City with real-life activists like civil rights leaders Bayard Rustin and Dorothy Cotton, as well as LGBT plus firebrand Larry Kramer. Just to check, how many people here know who Larry Kramer was? Just raise your hand. Okay. That's remarkable. And you probably know more, I work in television. There's always like 20-year-old production assistants fresh out of college who come around. And I asked one of them, do you know who Larry Kramer was? And he said, yes, he was an LGBT plus leader. And I said, what else do you know? And there was nothing, right? Legends sort of become these like postage stamps. They get the legend treatment. It's sort of glossy. It doesn't give you a lot of depth. I said, Larry Kramer screamed at a lot of people. He had a horrible temper. I talked to somebody once who told me Larry Kramer sent them a hate fax. And I said, well, how does that work? And they said, well, I made the mistake of, he was doing an essay collection. And somebody said, you'd better invite Larry to be in the essay collection. And he said, he'll tell you he's too busy, but just go ahead and tell him what you're working on and invite him so he doesn't gripe at you later. So the person did that. Larry Kramer faxed back, not only will I not be in your essay collection, I think your essay collection's a horrible idea. I think it was done better by this person and you should give the whole thing up. He sent that as a fax, Larry Kramer was this really colorful person. And in the book, I try to give that color back to him in a way that his legend has taken it from him. My first novel also includes an appearance from President Trump's father, Fred Trump. Now, he's a good example of how I characterize real people in a novel. As a rule, I don't want to depict a person doing anything outside of their known behavior. I'm not going to have someone sleeping around unless they were known to sleep around. I'm not going to have anyone snorting cocaine unless people knew they did that drug. But this doesn't mean I give everybody sort of this saintly treatment. In my novel, I depict Fred Trump as a racist slumlord. I didn't do this to stick it to him. I didn't do this, just to be mean. I did it because that's what the historical record shows. He had a history of letting his buildings fall into neglect and refusing to rent apartments to people of color. In fact, in 1973, the US Department of Justice Civil Rights Division filed a civil suit against the Trump Organization, which at the time had Fred Trump as the chairman and this guy named Donald Trump as the president. And they were charged with violating the Fair Housing Act of 1968. The case against the Trumps included that they used coded notations on rental applications that revealed the race of applicants. I just want to point out this was not like a very clever scheme, okay? You didn't need a decoder to do this. They were writing B in the corner of black applicants, in front of the black applicants, who eventually called and said, I didn't get the apartment and I don't know why, and they did this really funny thing. Other evidence against him is one rental agent said, and I quote, that Fred Trump told him, quote, not to rent to blacks. Again, there wasn't like innuendo here. There was not like a scheme that had to be unwoven. They were just really outwardly, openly racist. So I put that into the book. Now to me, we've gone off on a tangent. I do that. You should know that also about me. That's gonna happen tonight. I have notes here so I don't get too far away, but I like tangents and I promise they will be at least either illuminating or amusing. Like every novelist, I want readers to invest in the interior lives of my characters, and I also aim to inform my characters' thoughts and actions through the historical realities of their time. You might wonder, doesn't every good writer do this? And the answer is yes, to a degree. It would be hard to pen a novel about the French resistance without mentioning Nazis or World War II. But I'm often looking much further back than the historical moments my characters are navigating. Which is why tonight, as we discuss Baldwin and queer Black expats in Paris, we will be examining subjects through the lens of the decriminalization of sodomy laws in much of Western Europe, with the pioneering efforts of groundbreaking lesbians, the importance of entertainers as early immigrants, and the power of municipal reputations. If that sounds a little heady, I promise you it's only nerdy. And being nerdy can be fun and valuable. I also promise you that you will be rewarded for your time today. Over the course of the lecture, you will pick up at least a few facts that you can take with you and use at dinner parties to impress people that you want to make feel you are clever. Something like the decriminalization of sodomy laws might sound like it will be a niche topic, but you'll be surprised how easily you can work it into casual conversation. Because seriously, any modern opinion expressed about sexuality or sexual acts actually owes some influence to this specific subset of laws. In addition to keeping you stimulated with micro doses of history, I've also conceived of this evening as being interactive. So here's how that bit will work. I'm going to ask 6 questions throughout the lecture and a bonus tiebreaker question if we need one. After I finish reading the entire question, if you raise your hand the fastest and I call on you, and you have the correct answer, you're on a point. The audience member with the most points at the end of the lecture will win a signed copy of my latest novel, There's Only One Sin in Hollywood, which doesn't come out until June 2nd. All right, now that we've set the stakes, let's dig in and begin with Baldwin. In his own words, from the 1970 documentary short, Meeting the Man, James Baldwin in Paris. I love this opening in this story because it also goes to something I love, which is like legend and the way we tell a story over and over again. And it sort of gets smoothed out and it gets fine and it gets solidified, and some of the context around it is lost. But let's start with this. So at the tender age of 24, Baldwin becomes an expat in Paris. He's got $40 to his name. This brings us to our first question for the in-person trivia quiz. Okay. Do they have prices right here? No, it's okay. It's a daytime game show in America. And the way it works is you have to guess the price of something like a gallon of milk. And it's whoever gets closest without going over. So if it's $1 and you guess $1.01 and someone else guessed 75 cents, even though they're further away numerically, they win because they were under. So I'm going to ask this question. We'll take the first 3 people, and whoever, by Price is Right rules, gets it, gets the first point. And I'm just going to shoot your head in the air. I'm just going to call. We'll see how it goes, okay? So the question is, $40 in 1948 is equivalent to how many dollars today? Take your guesses. Yes? $1,100. $1,100. That's one guess. Anyone else? Yes?
$800.
$800. Back?
$1.
$1. Okay. So by the price, he's basically saying, I think the other 2 are over. I don't know where it is, but if they're over, I win with $1. He wins with $1. According to the United States Department of Labor's Consumer Price Index inflation calculator, $40 in 1948 is equivalent today to $556.23. Not a lot of money to start a new life. I grew up hearing this story. He came with $40, he came with $40. It was years later that I learned another piece of that story that I think adds context to it, which is before he moved to Paris, he won a scholarship prize for $1,500. He had $1,500. Now, he used that money to buy a plane ticket to Paris, and then he went to go see his mother and his 8 siblings. His father had died, and he felt very guilty. His 4-year-old sister burst into tears, and she was inconsolable. He said he's leaving. he gave them all of the money until he just took $40 for himself. It's interesting that he tells the story, I had $40, and the implication is, well, that's all the money I had in the world, right? You don't mention the $1,500 you won. And and what I like to do as a writer is I want to tease out, what does that mean? Why doesn't he want to tell us that, right? Does he not want us to think ill of his mother and his family and their need? Is it just tidier? I also, as a writer, want to know if I'm writing this scene and he's in Paris and he's got to sell his clothes, do you ever think about calling your mom and say, you didn't spend all the money, did you? Could you wire some to me? I could really use $20, right? History, if we leave it to the legend, really gets sanded down and we lose a lot of good stuff in it. And my job is to try to pull that out. Okay. Young Baldwin's primary contact when he first arrived was a fellow African-American expatriate and author named Richard Wright, who had moved to Paris with his second wife in 1946. Richard Wright, of course, gained literary immortality for writing the novel Native Son. But here's a point of fact that would have been known to Baldwin and is often forgotten today. Native Son wasn't just a bestseller. It was in its day like Harry Potter bestseller. It sold so wildly, it made Richard Wright the wealthiest black writer of the era. A travel tip as old as time states that if you are young, undistinguished, and broke, make friends with someone older, established, and wealthy. Baldwin didn't just, you know, I'm sure he admired Richard Wright, but this is also a very vital, important contact to make because this person is connected, they have funds, they could help you. By the way, I looked into the sales data for Native Son, which was published in the spring of 1940. It brings us to our second question. Price is Right rules again apply. How many hardback copies did Native Son sell in the first 3 weeks after publication? Guesses? Any bids? Yes. 2,000? Okay. Yes. 200,000. Yes. Huh? 20. 250,000. You have a point. For the record, I'd kill for those numbers now. Baldwin also fell in with other African-American expats and a group of French writers like Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre. Yet maybe the most significantly, he made friends with the editors of Zero, a French literary magazine, who in 1949 would publish Baldwin's essay, Everybody's Protest Novel. I should note here that Everybody's Protest Novel is usually characterized as the first public shot in the feud between James Baldwin and Richard Wright, as if the essay were simply written as a takedown of Wright's Native Son. But I think Baldwin would want me to note that the essay had larger aspirations. It aimed to dismantle and discredit the genre of protest novels, which he felt were inherently dishonest and hopelessly bound up in the stereotypes and pathology of the oppressors. In short, Baldwin would argue that protest novels tried to curry favor with oppressors by submitting that the oppressor had some valid points, but it may be taken things a little too far. The essay's primary target is Uncle Tom's Cabin by American abolitionist Harriet Beecher Stowe. Native Son isn't even mentioned in the essay until the final long paragraph. So Baldwin might argue that Wright took the matter more personally than he ought to. I mean, it really wasn't about his book, right? It was, I'm doing this, and I just mentioned you in the conclusion. Now, I think Wright would want me to tell you that Baldwin wrote this devastating line about Native Son. Quote, "Below the surface of this novel there lies, as it seems to me, a continuation, a complement of the monstrous legend it was written to destroy." Let's decode that. You've written a classic that made you rich, but in my opinion, it does nothing but undermine itself by the end of the book. It would be difficult not to take a line like that personally. Shortly after the essay appeared in the pages of Zero magazine, Wright got wind of it and read it for himself. Enraged is not too strong a word to describe Wright's reaction. He sought out Baldwin, heading to the La Deux Margot, a cafe he knew Baldwin frequented. Wright came in hot, firing a few choice words at the 25-year-old upstart. Now, I personally try to avoid making a scene, so I wouldn't have confronted anyone like Wright did. And were I confronted like this, I'd try to de-escalate the situation, but I am not Baldwin, and Baldwin had had a few drinks. Before I continue with this literary grudge match, it's time for our third question. Does anyone know what Baldwin's favorite drink of choice was when he was low on funds and writing for hours at the table of the Parisian cafes? Yes?
Cognac and coffee or whiskey and coffee?
Yes, that's dead on. I had coffee and cognac, and last week I tried this drink at a cafe. I did not finish the cup. He was made of stronger stuff than me. I found it stimulating in all the wrong ways. Okay, back to the action. So Wright came in yelling. Baldwin was not cowed by Wright and responded to the 40-year-old man in a way that today would be the equivalent of saying, "I said what I said." There are conflicting reports on who took the first swing, but a messy, unsettling fisticuffs ensued. The African-American novelist Chester Hines was present for the fight and stepped in to break it up after a couple tables had been knocked down. Baldwin and Wright never spoke to each other again. Now, why did I tell you this story? One is because I love gossip. Even when it's like 80 years old, I think it's really good. But the other is, this goes back to my feeling about legends. And Baldwin and Wright, as we know, possessed these lofty literary goals. They wielded impressive talent. They also had egos that got bruised and tempers that flared, and they managed sometimes to get themselves in the middle of messy situations. I also mention Everybody's Protest novel because it not only speaks to what Baldwin was doing within a year of his arrival in Paris, which was establishing his presence on the literary scene, but it also speaks to a benefit of being among the French at large and Parisians in general. Zero magazine had a short lifespan and a sporadic output. Its first issue was published in 1948, and its last issue appeared in 1950. There were 6 issues total. Baldwin, I believe, would have been hard-pressed to find an American publisher willing to run his audacious essay for American readers so early in his career. Places like The New Yorker might have dismissed his scant reputation and judged the material beneath their elevated white standards. And outlets like Ebony might have deemed it blasphemous to sanction the killing of a black sacred cow. Remember, Richard Wright had reached the height of respectability and renown. And also remember that, Baldwin talks about why he came here. One reason was he could not get his career off the ground in America before he came to Paris. He had gone to black newspapers, gone to black magazines. They were not interested in him, either because they found his material too radical or because they could read that he was effeminate and gay and they didn't want that in their midst. But he could not get anything going here. So the American sensibilities that were obstacles here were not so in France, where a little scandal, a little blood spilled from a sacred cow, could be just the thing to spice up the pages of a literary magazine. Now, Baldwin did more than incite passions among fellow writers during his 9 years in Paris. He completed his first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, and he wrote his second novel, much of which is set in Paris. Our fourth question this evening: what is the title of James Baldwin's second novel? I'm gonna go glasses. They were neck and neck. You first. Glasses first, please.
Giovanni's Room.
You guys can split the point, but you're correct. Now, in Paris, Baldwin reconnected with Buford Delaney, a brilliant painter and a fellow African-American and homosexual. I say reconnected because Delaney and Baldwin had known each other in New York. Delaney was like a father figure to him, a mentor to him. They had planned to maybe go to Paris at the same time. Delaney couldn't get his money together. James won this scholarship, or won this $1,500, so he could buy a plane ticket, and we know what happened to the rest of the money. So Delaney came later, but they had built this bond. Delaney's interesting to me because he was rather circumspect about his sexuality while living in Harlem, worried that being too openly gay would lead to his being ostracized even among those in the black community. So he moves to Paris in part to gain the freedom to be more openly homosexual. Delaney died in Paris in 1979. So why did Baldwin, Delaney, and other African-American gay men like actor Gordon Heath, and I dare add composer Howard Swanson to the list, move to Paris when they found the double taxation of bigotry of being black and queer in the United States too oppressive? I think one of the answers can be found in the decriminalization of sodomy laws. Go with me on this. My native country, hopelessly puritanical United States of America, decriminalized sodomy in 2003. I was 24 years old, and apparently I'd been an outlaw for several years. So I'd like to do a quick survey of when sodomy laws were abolished across a sizable swath of Eastern Europe, just to give us some perspective of where France fits in this picture. Good old Greece decriminalized sodomy in 1951. The United Kingdom decriminalized sodomy in 1967. Followed, to my surprise, by East Germany in 1968 and West Germany in 1969. In 1971, Austria decriminalized non-commercial same-sex sexual acts between adults. How's that for a distinction? You can do it, but don't charge for it. Spain was zealously oppressive towards homosexuals during the reign of Franco, and even after his death in 1975, the hate lingered. In 1977, the first gay pride demonstration in Barcelona was crushed by the police. It wasn't until 1979 that Spain decriminalizes homosexuality. Portugal decriminalized homosexuality in 1982, Ireland in 1993. The Italians have a rather wishy-washy relationship with homosexuality that I find fascinating. So this is going to be one of our tangents. Homosexuality in ancient Rome, from the Republic to the Empire, was common and legalized. The first same-sex marriage is recorded in 27 BC in the reign of Augustus. Christianity, a party killer if there ever was one, dashes the laissez-faire view of homosexuality in the 4th century of the modern era. Homosexuality becomes sinful, illegal, and forbidden. Yet the government continues collecting taxes for the earnings of male sex workers for the next 150 years. That kind of hypocrisy is just like delicious to me. Flash forward in 1476, Leonardo da Vinci, at the age of 24, was charged with sodomy along with 3 other young men, all of whom were acquitted. We see homosexual coitus remain a crime, but its prosecution is lax and selective. In 1805, Napoleon eliminates laws against homosexuality in his code on the French client states, which includes northern Italy. But after Napoleon washes out in Waterloo, homosexuality is again criminalized in Italy. There's a lot of back and forth into the turn of the century in Italy. In the end, it's 2003 when the decriminalization, when it's decriminalized and that you can no longer discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation and employment. And that comes about in conformity with the European Union directives. In 2016, Italy approves same-sex marriage. This brings us to France and our 5th question of the evening. In what year did France decriminalize sodomy? Glasses.
French Revolution, 1789.
It is the French Revolution. I've got 1791, but so you're very close. I'm at Price is Right rules. Congratulations. It falls out of the penal code during the French Revolution, making France the first country in the world to do so. This was done with little fanfare. No big speeches, no proclamations, no one comes forward and takes credit for it. It's happening during the final years of the reign of Louis XVI. To the extent that a reason for the change can be located, it seems the ruling class felt that with revolutionaries calling for their heads, they had bigger things to worry about than policing the sex lives of queers. This is awfully important and lovely to me because it speaks to something Baldwin said of the French. He said they met him with an indifference that he found liberating. Technically, he called it an arrogant indifference. But I have not had that experience, and that adjective is not germane to my point, which is indifference is underrated. Indifference is recognition that other people's business is not your business. Oftentimes in political movements, we are aiming to change hearts and minds. We want those who stand in opposition to us to adopt the warm feelings we have about ourselves. Or failing that, we often demand tolerance. Tricky thing about tolerance is that it's a form of seeking permission. To tolerate something presumes you are in a position to oppose it or stop it. You don't tolerate the rotation of the earth around the sun because you have no control over it. You have no say. Now, you might tolerate a loud party from a neighbor that's gone way too late, and you might tolerate it because they gave you a heads up and you know it's their 30th birthday. So out of generosity, you don't call the police and get it shut down. Tolerance implies not only that you are granting a concession, but that you have a rightful claim to grant a concession to another person. When it comes to my behavior between consenting adults as a gay black man, I don't want to have to appeal to racists and homophobes for their concessions, their understanding, their tolerance. I'd much rather meet with their indifference. Now, not to draw too far a line under it, but the types of people that governments define as criminals more or less find themselves demonized by the public over time. For example, in the United States, citizens who subscribed to socialism and communism met often and openly before and during the Great Depression, but found themselves under attack and driven underground by politicians and the general public once the Red Scare and McCarthyism took hold in the 1950s. Through selective prosecution, and all state prosecution is selective, governments tell their people who to despise. Governments, through their laws, create public enemies. The French government's indifference towards practicing sodomites meant the negative public attention didn't ferment into publicly acceptable bigotry to the extent that it did in countries, both in the past and present, that prosecuted and demonized queer people. All right, back to Baldwin. He traveled in circles that brought him into contact with one legendary retainer, and I'd like to show a video from her work and talk about what she represents to this topic. That clip is from the 1934 movie Zuzu, and the star is Josephine Baker. Although she and Baldwin didn't become close friends, Baldwin owed his ability to set up shop in Paris to queer women like Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker moved to Paris a generation before Baldwin. Upon her arrival in 1925, she found a Paris between world wars. The rent was cheap, the city had a spirit of renewal, and Sapphic women led the way in creating a queer community in Paris, especially for those who were artists. Neighborhoods such as Montparnasse became the new haven for queer women who were experiencing a grim but profound reality in the aftermath of the Great War. Namely, and this is one of those turns of history where I feel bad about it. I need you to know I feel bad about it, even though I'm going to tell you what happened. Namely, so many men were killed in World War I that being a single adult female became far less suspect, far less of an outlier. The prying, patriarchal question that still gets put to single women: why aren't you married yet? Can't you find a husband? Where's your man? had an unassailable answer in the decade after the First World War. Not only were there a shortage of men that everyone was painfully aware of, but if a woman found herself under pressure from a male suitor, she could claim that she was forever brokenhearted, having lost her beloved in the war. For queer women, this was a golden opportunity to break from the shackles of heteronormative rituals and lifestyles and to again keep everyone out of your business. They could live together, room together. People weren't questioning it as much. They just assumed you'd lost your man to the war. As these women came out to their neighbors and friends, they did a lot of work in normalizing what queer life could mean. They proved to heterosexual Parisians in the know that queer neighbors could be good neighbors, that there was nothing to fear. Now, back to Josephine Baker. I don't need to tell you what she meant to France, and the sixth question is practically a giveaway, but here it is. In 2023, Josephine Baker became the first Black woman to be granted interment inside what Parisian monument? The Pantheon. Here's my favorite thing about the Pantheon, about this story. You know she's not really in there, right? Her body's still in Monaco. Her family didn't want to move it. They'd had a big ceremony. They called it a symbolic coffin, filled with the dirt from places she had lived, like St. Louis and Paris. It's amazing. But yeah, it's almost a trick question. So she was interned there in memory, is how it sort of turned out. Josephine Baker's success in Paris is hard to overestimate. My daughter is named Josephine, and she has a watercolor print of Josephine Baker in her bedroom. I told her that Josephine Baker was the Beyonce of her day. In less than 2 years after she moved to Paris, Baker was reportedly the highest paid female and the most photographed woman in Europe. Her reputation as an entertainer, civil rights champion, and humanitarian are concrete. The precise nature of her sexuality is more slippery. I don't think she would have considered herself a lesbian. She'd have used the term of the day and called herself maybe a lady lover from time to time. Sexual interludes with women seems to be something she did between marriages to men. But the concept of bisexuality wouldn't have been an identity floating around in many places, which is why I gravitate towards the word queer. Any deviation from strict heterosexuality can join me in the rainbow tent. Baker's bohemian laissez-faire status speaks to the work that women and artists have done to pave the way for the acceptability of queers of all stripes. I think because artists have a talent and sensibility that breaks from the norm, heterosexuals find it easier to accept them and accept that artists can be queer. Singers, dancers, musicians, painters, sculptors, and yes, writers get this sort of artistic leeway to be queer. I think artistic talent also serves as an overriding identity that gives other people an access point for connection. Imagine a not terribly socially adept heterosexual, no one here, of course, but struggling to make conversation with a homosexual because they believe erroneously that they have no areas of commonality. As soon as the person is told the homosexual is a novelist or a ballet dancer, suddenly there's safe ground for communication. The heterosexual says, "I've seen the ballet once," or "I read a book once. Tell me about your work." Artistic shop talk is not only, however, the main topic between heterosexuals and artistic homosexuals. It was also the primary discussion between Baldwin and his friends in Paris. Love affairs and unrequited yearning were sideshows. The main event was the art they were creating. Baldwin ultimately returned to the United States in 1957. The civil rights movement was heating up, and America appeared as if it was ready to reckon once and for all with racism embedded in its core. That didn't quite happen as fully as many dreamed it would, but Baldwin felt a moral duty to participate in the struggle. He saw himself not just as a writer, but as an American freedom fighter. He wanted to stand and be counted in the battle. I also reckon that Paris had given him what he needed to go on. He'd planted his flag on the literary scene. He left the United States an ambitious fledgling writer, and by that time he returned a conquering hero who had released Go Tell It on the Mountain, Giovanni's Room, and his essay collection, Notes of a Native Son. You have to let me have this one last tangent. Can we acknowledge the nerve, the shade of Baldwin titling his essay collection, Notes of a Native Son, considering his beef with Richard Wright? That feels like such a dirty attack. It's like I'm gonna take your famous title, add to it, and top it. Baldwin must have loved the idea of Wright having to walk into bookstores and see Notes of a Native Son and read the press and listen to the discussion about this book. Now that is how you stick it to an adversary. So let's conclude with a very small overview of what Black queer expats are experiencing today in Paris, with the understanding that the history of Baldwin has shined like a beacon for what is possible here. Paris has earned itself a legacy, a reputation for being a city that could peacefully, even openly, allow Black queer expats to weave into the fabric of the community without having to dull their colors. Today, you will find many liberal citizens of the United States aspiring to be expats. If you know how, see me afterwards. Fleeing the country is no longer the niche daydream of Baldwins and Bakers. But what strikes me most about the Black queer expat community in Paris today is the large extent to which it consists of West Africans and Central Africans. I realize it might seem less than academic to judge the vibrancy of a community by which of its members throw the hottest parties. But from Limelight in New York to the Abbey in Los Angeles, parties are a big part of how queer communities signal to one another that they are safe and liberated. Afro Boys Club throws a monthly party that rotates from location to location across Paris. The next one is April 4th, in case you're interested. There's also the BBB party, triple Bs for baby boy, a weekly dance party that invites African, Arabic, Caribbean, and mixed boys, I'm assuming that means bi or multiracial, to bump and grind to R&B, hip hop, pop, Afro, and Zouk music. I also focus on the gay club nights because the dancing, groping, kissing, and presumably light sex acts that can occur there can't take place openly and freely in many of the countries that queer Africans, expats, hail from. Sex and sexual acts between people of the same gender, by the way, let's talk about it. Sex and sexual acts, lot of leeway there, lot of openness to oppression in that what is a sexual act? I mean, a look can do it, right? Anyway, sex and sexual acts between people of the same gender is illegal in Senegal, it's illegal in Guinea, it's illegal in Cameroon. It's not technically illegal in other countries, but you can use the moral laws to prosecute it if you want to. And arrests are made quite regularly according to the research handbook on gender and sexuality and the law by Siri Gloppen and Lise Reichner. So, the need for safe havens still exists, and Paris remains a city that is viewed as offering escape and opportunity. It is an image that took centuries to solidify and earn, and it appears it will endure so long as the citizens of Paris uphold their end. Thank you for listening. Before we open up for questions, we have to determine our trivia winners. And before we do that, I'd like to mention some of the sources that helped me craft this lecture. James Baldwin, a biography by David Leeming. James Baldwin, a love story by Nicholas Boggs. The documentary, I'm Not Your Negro, directed by Raoul Peck. Exploring the Secret Lesbian World of Interwar Paris by Kaz Rowe. The biography of Josephine Baker, The Hungry Heart by Jean-Claude Baker and Chris Chase. Josephine Baker's Secret War, the African-American star who fought for France and freedom by Hannah Diamond. Okay, you got 2 right? And you got how many right?
Ask me another question.
Is it two? I think it's, all right, tiebreaker question between the two of you. You ready? In what French commune did James Baldwin die in 1987? Yes.
Some folk of Owens.
Yes. Congratulations. I will sign the new book for you when we break. All right, we're now open for questions, and I think they have mics.
Yeah, I have the mic.
So you don't have to
can
yell.
Raise your hand, and I'll bring it around.
Yes. Don't speak without the mic.
Thank you very much for the lecture. It was very interesting. So I have a naive question. Could you give us a recommendation of a book or books by queer black writers which were written about Paris or have something to do with Paris? You already named one, but could you say again?
Oh, no. I think Giovanni's Room is a really good place to start, especially for this lecture. He wrote it here. It's about here. So I would start there. Oh, goodness. This is tough. I'm trying to think of... can I get back to you? Let me think. It's always hard. That's hard. Other questions? I've said a lot of things, and you don't have to have agreed with them. So,
It's not necessarily a question, but just thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So, my name is Brian Scott Bagley. I'm the founder of the Museum of Josephine Baker and African Descendants of Paris. I was also the co-founder of the first Black Paris Pride, and I am the founder of the Gay Black Paris, Gay Paris Noir, Queer Black Paris Historic Walking Tours.
All right.
So, for a very, very long time, I was just this one little guy on this island doing this work, and I had some people against me. It was tough. So it's a great joy to see a kindred spirit, and I'm a nerd too. I'm such a nerd. So it's a blessing to see you here doing this wonderful work, and I would love to have you on the tour one day and share some. We will geek out.
All right. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I tell you how relieved I am that he wasn't like, by the way, I'm an expert on Josephine Baker, and how dare you? How dare you?
Hi, thank you very much. That was fascinating. And you don't mind my sort of completely changing directions
Yeah.
here, but I'm really curious about your writing, your screenwriting,
Yes.
and particularly your work on Narcos.
Yeah.
The season 2, I think you wrote a
Yes,
couple
I
of
did.
episodes. Could you talk a little bit about, because what you wrote later, the Bel-Air, is much more on this topic, but what did you contribute in terms of story to Narcos?
I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to tell you this story. I'm now also very much. I'm like, oh, we have a camera recording. So let me recalibrate what I can say. So I joined that show before season 2. We were working on it before season 1 came out, and I joined it, and there was this feeling of we're not sure what this show is going to be. We're not sure if this is going to be a hit. And there was real trepidation. I've never had the experience where no one was quite aware of what they had until it came out and it just took off. And so that was really exciting and really gratifying. The other thing that made that job interesting is normally when you go in a writer's room, your job is to generate material. Just what's the story going to be? We had way too much material. We could never tell all the crazy things that Pablo Escobar did and all the other people in the drug trade did. So it was really just about editing it down so it could happen. It was also, I will say, probably one of the last times in the television industry where we just had money to burn. When you watch that show and they're in the presidential palace in Colombia and they're showing you that, that's the presidential palace in Colombia. We just bought whatever we wanted. I had an episode where Pablo Escobar had someone thrown out of a helicopter to their death. And normally you do that on a stage with a green screen. They took a stuntman up into the air. I think he gets paid like $10,000 a jump, and he probably jumped 6 times because we had to film it from behind him and above and all the ways we get that shot. And so you're watching like 30 seconds of television that probably cost roughly $100,000. And they don't let us spend money like that anymore.
I think we have time for one final question.
It won't be really a question, but I think your work is really important because we lack representation of people of color in queer communities. So thanks again for your work. And I'm sorry I'm going to leave early because
That's
I
all
have
right.
a train.
That's all right. Thank you for coming. Thank you. No.
So thanks again.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe one more then, yeah.
There's a.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Jorge Sosa from the AUP Library. I'm one of the LGBT members at AUP. I have always wondered about this right to indifference in Paris. And I think my hypothesis as a gay man is that you have your own town, your hometown, and then you leave in that fact, that act of being abroad in a different place liberates you. My personal vécu is that I left Ecuador for Lexington, Kentucky, okay, and then Washington, D.C. At the time, this was in the 90s, so I think that I felt what Baldwin filmed in Paris, but I don't think the French, and still now, have that indifference vis-a-vis a gay person. When I talk to French gay men, when they come to Paris, they feel that, but when they are in their provinces, in their hometowns, it's not the same. So I think that the fact of being somewhere else is what changes you and makes you feel liberated. Because there's no indifference vis-a-vis the gay people in Paris.
Well, by the way, I mean, it's
the metro, maybe.
No, when you leave home, when you leave your hometown, not only are you escaping sort of the bigotry, but you're escaping a very personal version of it, right? It's one thing if like a stranger doesn't like you. It's another thing if like your childhood best friend's mom suddenly finds out you're gay and won't speak to you. I mean, it just kind of cuts deeper. So there is a great power to just move anywhere. Just pick a place and go and start over and be you. But what is interesting is that Paris has had this in now 3 or 4, maybe 5 generations of people looking to this place. Earned or not earned. Do you know what I mean? And I'm sure like there are parts of Paris where it is completely unearned and parts where people kind of live up to that expectation. And that's what's interesting to me is how this city gained that image that just keeps people coming, whether it plays out for them or not. And my little theory is that you can trace the roots of that all the way back to the revolution and just the idea of like, you know what? We got bigger things to deal with than who's sleeping with who. We're the French.